Well, today is known as Good Friday. It is the day that we remember the death of Jesus, which makes it quite odd to call this day, Good Friday. I mean, I can't think of anyone who would want the day that they died on to be remembered as being a good day. So why is it called Good Friday? Shouldn't it be called Horrible Friday or Unjust Friday? After all, it is a day that takes our minds to a graphic, blood-soaked, torturous, unjust event. One that exposes the depraved nature of man. Why Good Friday? Well, let me share with you a story that I believe sums up why this day is remembered as Good Friday. Long ago, there was a man who was being detained in a dark and hopeless prison, and he was held there because of crimes that he had most definitely committed. He was there by his own doing. In the truest sense, he was in a prison of his own making. This man was a known murderer and anarchist and a thief. He was a wretch of a man who not only killed people, but who incited others into all sorts of evil as well. Not much more is known about him, but given those characterizations, we can rightly assume that other areas of his life were also wrecked with chaos and sin. He was a man of malice and hatred, a reckless man who was hell-bent on harming others for his own selfish gain, a man that the majority of society desperately wanted to avoid. He was a man who needed and who deserved to be locked away because he had proven himself to be a threat to others. And as this man awaited his punishment in prison, it really seemed as though nothing could save him. His just punishment was inevitable, it seemed. There was no way out. He was going to receive the penalty that he so deserved. And he could have been dragged out of that prison at any day, at any moment, any time of the day, without any warning, to be tortured and to be executed. That was the sad reality of this man's life as he waited day by day for his day of reckoning. Yet there is a very surprising twist to this story. As far as we know, this man never had to pay for the crimes that he committed. The earthly justice that seemed inescapable never happened. Some have called him a very lucky man. Some have called him a very fortunate man. A man who was simply at the right place at the right time. You see, before this man could pay for his crimes, something very strange and unforeseen happened. This is where another person who is accused of crimes enters into this story. Except this man was innocent. Yet he was irrationally hated by many, one who had done nothing wrong, yet was accused of many wrongdoings. This innocent man was brought before the authorities, accused of serious crimes, but after examining him, the authorities quickly realized that he had in fact done nothing wrong, certainly nothing meriting execution or long detainment. They found him to be innocent of the charges that had been brought against him, yet the authorities knew that the crowds were whipped into a hateful frenzy wanting this man's blood. They knew something had to be done. The authorities knew something had to be done. They didn't find anything wrong with him, but they also knew that the crowds would revolt if this man was set free. So trying to scheme a politically expedient way out of this predicament, the authorities decided that they would make an offer to the crowd that they did not think the crowd could refuse. So here's what they did. They brought before this crowd that had assembled, this crowd that hated this innocent man, they brought before this crowd this vile, wretched murderer and thief who was awaiting his just punishment in prison, and they stood him right next to this innocent man who had literally done nothing wrong. Now, by this point, if you have read the Bible much or if you've been in church much, you probably know this narrative. It probably sounds very familiar to you. You probably know that this evil, murderous villain was named Barabbas, and this innocent man was named Jesus. And the one that they stood before, the Roman authority, the Roman governor, his name was Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate asked a very simple question to the crowd that day. While looking at Jesus and while looking at Barabbas, he motioned to the crowd, he quieted them, and he announced to the crowd that day, I will release one of these two men, Jesus, or I will release to you Barabbas. Now keep in mind, Barabbas is a known murderer, a known anarchist, and a known thief. And he simply asked that question. Who can I give to you, Barabbas or Jesus? And Pilate, I would assume at this point, thought that he had found his way out of this mess. Surely the crowd would want Jesus released and not Barabbas. But to Pilate and absolutely Barabbas's surprise, the crowds cried out, "Give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. Release him and crucify Jesus." The crowds wanted the blood of Jesus. They had an insatiable thirst for the blood of Christ, and they wanted it so badly that they were willing to allow a known murderer to walk freely among them and their children. That is the level of hatred they had for Jesus at this point. And since Pilate could not afford a political loss, he released Barabbas back into the general population and turned Jesus over, ultimately to be murdered. Just like that, Barabbas was a free man. No longer in prison, no longer under a death sentence, but free. The innocent man, Jesus, would take the place of the guilty man, Barabbas. This story is found in all four gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is important because in this story, we see a vivid picture of the gospel displayed perhaps more clearly than any other place. Listen to Mark chapter 15, verses 6 through 15. It says, "Now at the feast, he, Pontius Pilate, used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. The man named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection. John's gospel tells us also that he was a robber. The crowd went up and began to ask him to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. Pilate answered them, saying, 'Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews, Jesus?' For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy, but the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Answering again, Pilate said to them, 'Then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?' And they shouted back, 'Crucify him.' But Pilate said to them, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they shouted all the more, 'Crucify him.' Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them. And after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified." Listen to this commentary from another pastor. He wrote, "I've often wondered what Barabbas was thinking at that point. He was sitting on death row in a Roman prison and certainly aware that he could be killed any day. There was not a clear or straightforward process of parole or further appeals for him to count on. Prisoners did not have any rights. It was over for him. There was no hope. He was a murderer who deserved death, and deep down, he probably knew it. Each passing day was one day closer to certain death. He may have been imagining it. The flogging, the mocking, and eventual death, it was coming. And then the day comes. He can hear the shouts ringing throughout the courtyard, 'Crucify him, crucify him.' Perhaps he was thinking to himself, 'They're coming for me.' The guards open the door to his cell and drag him outside. But then an astonishing thing happens. Everyone is celebrating his new freedom. His chains are released and he is set free. The murderer is set free. Put yourself in his sandals for a minute, he writes. You are walking to your death in chains, and then all of a sudden, when you least expect it, you become a free man. Then you hear the words begin again, 'Crucify him, crucify him,' and you see another walking by. Those chants are not for you. The guards are dragging another man to his death, Jesus of Nazareth. He's beaten and he is flogged and he is forced to carry his cross to his death. It's the very cross you had imagined yourself carrying only moments earlier. You think to yourself, that's my death he's dying. Barabbas is the one person in history who could say that Jesus literally carried his cross. Jesus took his death, and Barabbas was given the freedom that Jesus deserved. Jesus bore the guilt and shame and curse and disgrace and death that Barabbas deserved. Barabbas received the release, the freedom, and the life that Jesus deserved. The innocent for the guilty. The innocent in the place of the guilty. Think of the contrast we find in Jesus and Barabbas. Throughout his ministry, Jesus had fed the poor, sometimes through miraculous means, while Barabbas had stolen from others. Jesus had never wronged anyone, while Barabbas' practice in life was to wrong whomever he had to wrong in order to get what it was he wanted. Jesus had healed the sick and the hurting. He had consoled and comforted the brokenhearted, while Barabbas had caused immeasurable pain to so many different people and so many different families. Jesus had spoken words of blessing over others, while Barabbas had cursed not only man, but God. Jesus had given life, while Barabbas had taken life. See, what we find in the story of Barabbas is an incredible picture of substitution, the righteous in the place of the unrighteous, the loving master in the place of the lying murderer, the blood of the king shed for the freedom of the guilty. Barabbas was released from the payment his crimes demanded. There were no conditions. There was nothing he had to do except simply to have the chains removed and walk away freely. Now, let me just say this. If we are to identify with anyone in this story, surely if you and I are honest, we must admit that we are Barabbas in this story. Now, some of you who, you might be listening right now and you might say, no, wait a second, I'm going to stop you right there. I've never murdered anyone. I've never led insurrection against a nation or against a government. I'm not nearly as bad as Barabbas. I've never stolen, or I've certainly not made it my practice of stealing. I'm not Barabbas in this story. But listen, the Bible is very clear that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The Bible is clear that there is no one righteous, no, not even one. Despite this, Jesus willingly substituted himself for us. And he didn't have to do this. Listen, Jesus was not a victim of circumstances that were outside of his control. He willingly went to the cross. At any moment throughout this, he could have called upon legions of angels to come to his rescue. He instead willingly subjected himself to the horrors of the persecution and the death that awaited him. Pontius Pilate and the Roman soldiers did not have the power or the authority to do this to Jesus. The Jewish religious leaders did not have the power to make this happen. Jesus Christ willingly gave himself as the perfect substitute. That's why 2 Corinthians 5:21 says that he made him who knew no sin to be sin so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That's why Romans 5:6-8 says, for while we were still helpless, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. That's us. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man some would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. One old preacher said it like this. He said, Jesus was counted as a sinner before God so that we could be counted as righteous before God. Christ willingly went to the cross to rescue people who had been separated from God because of their sin and rebellion. That is, in essence, the gospel. Jesus was our substitutionary sacrifice so that we who believe can be forgiven and washed clean of our sin and guilt. Like Barabbas, we can walk in freedom because Christ paid our penalty, taking our place. Why is this a good day? Why Good Friday? Why Good Friday? Here's the reason. Despite the tragedy and injustice of what happened to Jesus, this is not a funeral service that we remember this Friday every year, this Friday of the year every year. This is not a funeral service. Had Jesus stayed dead, then he would be like many other martyred religious leaders throughout history who claimed to be something that they were not. But listen, Jesus did not stay dead. Death couldn't hold him. The grave could not keep him. He is alive. And I pray that you know Christ as Lord. I pray that you have placed your faith in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I pray that you have surrendered your life to him, for he is immeasurably worthy of our lives. Good Friday is here, but Resurrection Sunday is coming. It is on the way, and I invite you, if you don't have a church home, we encourage you to find one, but if you don't have a church home, we invite you this Sunday as we celebrate the life and the resurrection of Christ. We're going to meet at the Community Hall, which is 612 6th Avenue, right here in Belle Fourche. Our services will be at 8:45 and 10:15 this Sunday morning. We'll also have kids' church during both of those services for preschool and babies at our kids' building, which is just a few doors down from Community Hall. It is at 615 5th Avenue. We'd love to have you join us as we celebrate our risen Lord together. Let's thank God for the sacrifice of Jesus. Worship him today.